kick it off. Hi, everyone. My name is Max. We've got Matt on the line as well. We're going to do some intros in a moment. But just to introduce our talk, we are here to talk about an innovative approach to giving back to open source projects that power your business. We're going to break down all of those things, what it means to give back, what it means for open source projects to power your business, and why we feel that this is an innovative approach and some of the outcomes that that we've achieved together here. My name is Max. I'm the head of growth at MLH, Major League Hacking. I'll introduce the company and what we do in more detail shortly. I've got a background in education, tech strategy, and software engineering, and I have to lean on those things really every day in my professional life as we run programs like this. I really love building businesses that are at the intersection of technology, principles, and impact, and I hope that you'll see just a little bit of what MLH does in that space over the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to try and talk for around 30 and just leave some space for some dialogue, for some questions and discussion at the end. Matt, over to you. Tell us about yourself, and then we'll get into your slides.
Hi, my name's Matt. I'm the Director of Investment Platforms at RBC Global Asset Management. We are the largest asset managers and money managers in Canada. I've spent a number of years as a software engineer before moving into a official leadership role where I look after a number of software development teams of what I like to call forward deployed software engineers. Everyone that works for me works very closely with front office investment teams on a daily basis, building up bespoke solutions to enable their investment process. And I care a whole lot about Python enablement, in particular in the investment industry. I've seen a lot of really ugly things happen, things like Excel spreadsheets over the past 20 years. You would believe the millions and billions of dollars that are managed out of Excel. It would probably freak you out, but that's how this industry is. So pushing for something a little more explicit and capable like Python has definitely been something I've been focused on the past number of years for investment professionals.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so what do we do together here? So RBC have worked together with MLH to make significant contributions to a number of strategic open source projects. These are open source projects that essentially are part of the fabric of the platforms and infrastructure that RBC Global Asset Management use to power their business. And we've done that in a way that has built a pathway for early career developers, not only to get into open source, but to learn about the financial services industry, to learn about enterprise software engineering, and ultimately some of them have even gone on to continue working for Matt and in other parts of the Royal Bank of Canada. I'm just going to talk through a few numbers. So in the last 3 years, we have had 18 early career developers who have started their journey in open source through this partnership, through this specific project and engagement that we've run together. We've had around 4,500 hours of engineering time, of open source contribution that has been made by the participants of the program into these open source projects on behalf of RBC. And through that closed around, at least 60 issues, merged PRs, by the participants in the program, and really added a lot of engineering output and value into the projects that RBC care about. Beyond numbers, I'd love to share a minute, how does that feel for the people involved, right? Getting into an open source contribution program and going through that experience. So here's a couple of folks who've just finished their summer program in the fellowship. Benjamin talked about how this was a chance to join the world of open source, something he'd always been interested in, but never been able to really kick off his journey in. Really learning how important it is to contribute back into the community and learn and grow through that experience. Sean, similarly, right, built the confidence to commit to open source projects. That's one of the biggest barriers that people who are early in their career have. They think contributing code into open source is for like people with 50 years experience or something. It's not for me. I'm not wanted there. And also for a lot of people that come into this program, this is actually their first experience working on an established enterprise-like code base. And that's something we often forget about when we say, oh yeah, people can contribute to open source. Well, they're used to firing up their IDE and creating a new project and coding in that way, right? Not having to set up a complex development environment with dependencies and navigating an existing code base and often fragmented documentation. So lots of different learnings on a lot of different levels. Frederick, one of our favorite maintainers, he's been a big part of the program for a number of years. He's the maintainer for JupyterLab Git, which Matt's going to talk a little bit more about shortly. He's really passionate about supporting new contributors coming into open source. One of the biggest challenges for maintainers is getting new people in to contribute to their programs. The work that we've done together here has allowed people to make valuable contributions and taken away some of the burden and challenge and overhead that that typically maintainers have when they want to bring new contributors into their programs. So I'm going to hand back over to Matt, really just to kind of give the context. Why does RBC Global Asset Management care about this? Like, what are the projects that we've strategically been contributing to, and provide a bit of the context and kind of business rationale that's driven the partnership. And then I'm going to talk more about the program itself, and then hopefully we're going to have a very interactive, real-life case study of what the outcomes of the program are as well.
All right. Well, I guess for our side of the journey, if I go back into the before times, in the era before COVID, there was an op-ed, I guess it would have been the fall of 2019, that came out where Mark Wiseman, the former CEO of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, was quoted saying the following. If you're not learning the basics of Python, you're in deep trouble. You know why? Because you're being disrupted by somebody who's half your age or a 13-year-old girl sitting in their basement figuring out how to make investments better than you can. That's how fast the world is moving. Obviously a little hyperbolic and getting people's attention, but it did grab the attention of a number of people in the investment industry, and especially here again, where they really wanted to push forward this idea of actually leveraging Python and being more efficient. So why does it matter to adopt Python? If you jump to the next slide. A lot of it comes down to access to data. So if you're looking at the investment management industry, only about 20% of the data that's actually available is well structured. Where that other 80% is highly unstructured data and is generally referred to as alternative data sources. So this could be credit card information or investor reports or whatever the hell else, all kinds of different data sources. Of that 20% of structured data that's available for investing, it's highly commoditized in the form of ETFs or exchange traded funds. The issue with this is that it drives down both MERs and the amount of alpha, or I guess available money to be made, right, on this data. So to work with the other 80% of that data, or these alternative data sets, you need something more than traditional tools like Excel spreadsheets. They're just completely inadequate for these sorts of problems. And this is why Python comes into play and is important here. Do you mind jumping to the next slide? So working back from that, how do you make Python more accessible to what I call coders? So, investment analysts, people that don't have an engineering background, but are technically capable enough to do some things or some damage, I guess, right? So working back from that, I'm sure all of you have faced a lot of issues if you've worked with Python as to local dependency management and all that other fun stuff, things that typically you wouldn't want to expose to like a typical sort of business user. So this is where JupyterHub comes into play. This is a cloud-based platform that we have in place. It's really a turnkey Python notebook platform, provide low barrier to entry space for Python internet reporting and analytics, right? For us, we've created a very curated experience with a host of useful plugins and other additives to provide a nice, consistent experience for JupyterHub for our business users. So that, if I have an analyst that reaches out to me and say, hey, Matt, I want to start doing some Python. All I have to do is add them to a security group somewhere, give them a URL, and now they have a place where they can just start, coding Python and doing things. So, why do you want to do things in Python in the first place, aside from data access? Well, there's a lot of intellectual property in the investment industry that gets locked away in things like Excel spreadsheets, or that end up on people's PCs or network drive, which creates a lot of operational risk. There's a lot of daily processes that look like this. I've seen some very scary things over the years. So trying to encourage folks to get away from doing these things in spreadsheets a little more explicitly, and getting that intellectual property out of their head or out of some convoluted Excel spreadsheet somewhere is a good thing for everyone. So it's not just about getting that out of the spreadsheet. It's also about getting this stuff put somewhere safe, right? So using things like source control. So one of the things we really need to do is lower the barrier to entry to using those sorts of tools. And this is where the JupyterLab Git plugin really kind of comes into play, just to enable a better experience for that with GitHub. Unfortunately, with open source plugins and projects and things like that, they're often kind of buggy or they're missing features, and it's often very hard to support these types of things openly, especially when you're maybe a small team within a larger organization where there's a lot of restrictions around actually contributing back to open source. If you jump to the next slide there. So the adoption of open source platforms like Jupyter and the whole ecosystem around Python is a real no-brainer for us. This is where all the gravity is in the data science space for sure. So tapping into that open source ecosystem makes a whole lot of sense for us. As I mentioned before, it's challenging for us to kind of contribute back to the open source community and our situation. So finding mechanisms to be able to do that, and engaging with maintainers to fix, address key issues is a real problem for us, especially when our team is so small. I don't really have the resources to have some of my engineers go off and address some of these bugs or improve things when they're supposed to be delivering business value in other ways. So this is where we've reached out to our friends here at MLH, Major League Hacking, to help us contribute back to these open source projects. We sponsor things not only for the JupyterHub community with things like JupyterLab Git. We also have some fellows working on Airflow. We use other open source platforms like DAS, PySpark, and a myriad of other things. So MLH has really kind of come to the rescue for us and has really had a material impact on our users within our space and all the different investment analysts and things that we support. I've seen a huge uptick in the past year or so of assets that have now been produced from JupyterHub as a platform and found their way nicely and safely into the warm embrace of GitHub, which is very exciting for us. Again, reducing the operational risk is something that people really care about in a highly regulated industry such as ours, right? There's a lot of attention to that sort of thing. So whatever we can do to make the average coder or analyst more like a developer is just a good thing for us as a whole, as an organization.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matt. So MLH, like what is this MLH that's come to the rescue of Matt and his team? So at MLH, our mission is to empower the next generation of technologists, or hackers, as we often call them, because a lot of the way that we do this is through hackathons. We also run a myriad of other programs like workshops, educational programs, internships, and much more. That's a mixture of in-person and digital programs. Most importantly, all of them are free for developers. And the way we think about it is any aspiring technologist in the world can come to MLH, build a track record, build their network, build their experience, build their portfolio, build their proof of work, and ultimately launch their career. So, clearly this has kind of struck a chord with both student developers. We now have an alumni of about 600,000 with 150,000 active members. We define that as people who, within the last 12 months, have been to one of our hackathons or taken part in one of our programs. We are here at All Things Open specifically to talk about the MLH Fellowship. So the MLH Open Source Fellowship is a 12-week educational program that connects the best and brightest from our community, the types of people who are winning hackathons and building awesome projects in their spare time. We are connecting them up with open source projects that are aligned with their skills, with their interest areas, and connecting them with sponsored opportunities to spend an extended period of time learning about those projects, contributing to them, working closely with the mentors, the maintainers on the project, and generally going through that on-ramp to open source. Why is that important? Why do we care about that? We want the future of tech to be open and equitable to everyone. We don't want people who are able to commit a summer playing with some open source projects rather than working at Starbucks. We want this to be open to everyone. We want to enable companies to invest in the open source projects that power their businesses, and also in emerging talent. And most importantly, we take away a lot of the operational overhead of doing that and allow what I often talk about as a public cloud model where we run all of the infrastructure and companies come along, host their project or a project they care about on the program, and we take care of all the heavy lifting. The way that we wanted to talk about the learnings and the experience that we've had over the last 3 years together here is really around like 4 key motivations that drive companies and teams like Matt's to get involved in this program, and some of the lessons that we've learned around those. So let's start unpacking what I like to think of as the onion of motivation. That's not very catchy. I can't see that term picking up. But all right, let's get into it. Layer 1, open source investment. I think this one's pretty obvious. Why do companies invest in open source projects? I think it's been a theme of conversation throughout the week. There is very often a collaborative need, right? A requirement for wider participation to build and solve problems. There's often a technical need a specific piece of technology or some functional requirements to be met. There's often a philanthropic need. We care about this, we want to give back to the community. And the last one, I think Matt's talked about this as well, is lowering risk, right? The desire to share and mutualize software makes that better for everyone. Those are some of the key reasons. Another way to look at this is to think about, well, what are the models of investing in open source? So first thing a lot of companies do is open source their projects. You take a bit of a investment portfolio anecdote to this. This is a little bit like the big bets that you might make, picking a specific stock and going really long on that, right? This is a thing that you think is really useful. You want to get it out there. You're going to make a big investment in terms of marketing it, bringing external contributors on board. We've got lots of examples of that we've worked on. Like AWS Amplify is a very good one. I was here talking about that partnership last year. The next piece is contributing time and code into open source projects that you use. I think about that a lot like a tracker or a beta investment, right? It's about keeping pace with the market, making incremental spread of investments across things that you care about that are thematically aligned with your objectives. And the last bit, funding projects and foundations, a great thing to do as well. It's really like keeping some cash in your portfolio, right? Maintaining some stability and reducing external risks. I probably pushed into the finance portfolio metaphor a little bit too far there. The long and short of it is that there's lots of different ways of doing these three different things: giving money, giving time and resource, and giving projects to the world of open source. And I think the model with RBC is really interesting, right? I summarize Matt's needs from his intro. I characterize it about, there's limited engineering resource and ability to have FTEs going away from the business product roadmap and spending time investing their time in open source. There is a desire to give back, right? There's an awareness that this software is key for the business. And there's also a desire to influence the roadmap, right? There are specific features and integrations that Matt and his team particularly care about and would like to see prioritized. And there's also a need for robust technology, as you can imagine, with billions or even trillions of dollars running through those systems. So what we've done really is we've put together what I call a kind of a special outsourced version of 2 with a pinch of 3. So we are providing the engineering resource to make the code and time contributions back in a format that's really like funding those projects. So why invest in open source? I think that's pretty clear. Different models to do it. Lots of different ways to do it. I think the thing that we've found here, and what I think is really important, key takeaway about thinking about investing in open source, is you need to find a model and a mix of investment where the returns are aligned to your business needs. That might seem really obvious, but a lot of the time people are starting up an OSPO or an open source program, they just start doing the first things that come along and don't really think about how do the outputs of that align with with the bottom line or the top line of the business. So that is our big insight around open source investment. Zooming down a layer into the onion, we get into community engagement. Community drives improved engagement, it drives longevity of projects, and it drives a bigger crowd, because ultimately open source is about crowdsourcing. So investing in open source projects that have a strong community gives you, a lot more of those important things, right? Engaged projects, ones that last a long time and that have a big audience around them. What's really interesting about community engagement, or the community angle on open source investment, is that you get multiple horizons that sit behind it. So at one level, you're investing in the project team. That's great. They're getting resources, they're getting issues closed, they're getting PRs merged, the code base is building, they're getting more contributors. That's all wonderful stuff. But there's another horizon that sits behind that, which is that actually the open source ecosystem is growing, right? There are more developers in open source. The open source projects are growing in quality and scope. Generally, you are investing in open source advocacy and building the interest and engagement in open source as a whole, beyond just that project. And the last one is the tech community. With a program like this, where you're engaging early career developers, you're actually creating opportunity and pathways for emerging developers to not just get their start in their careers and grow, but actually to get into open source. And we've seen a lot of people taking that with them beyond the program. So, insight number 2, the best open source projects are more than lines of code. They operate in a community first way, and if you do so too, you will win. Projects where there isn't like a gatekeeper mentality, where mentoring and coaching advice is really forthcoming, where people from a range of different backgrounds come together and collaborate to create software that none of them could do in isolation. Those are the places where real community, where the real open source spirit exists, right? And those are where the breakthrough experiences for new contributors come. Focusing your engagement and investment on these types of projects has a really outsized return on many fronts. Going down another layer into our onion, technical outcomes. Let's talk a little bit about the technical outcomes that have been achieved through the program. So, by far the most tangible thing to a sponsor like RBC is that they get technical outputs, right? We talked about 4,500 hours of engineering time through the last 3 years of this program. The technical outputs and code contributions are one of the key things that the program facilitates. And we make a lot of effort to balance, 1, creating a meaningful technical outcomes for sponsors, and 2, providing a manageable and fulfilling educational experience for participants. So what we do is we go through a process of thinking about, what are the most important projects to Matt and his team. We've just started working on Apache Airflow because that's becoming increasingly strategic and important. There are some areas there to work on. What are the priority issues? What are the things that we can solve that will have the biggest bang for their buck for sponsors? And then we build that out into a project plan for fellows. So we think about their on-ramp. We think about, does it make sense for them to spend some time setting up their developer environment, doing some documentation tasks, getting into building some tests out around things. Those are all excellent ways of slowly ramping up, adding some value whilst learning an open source project. And then we get into typically like some bug fixes and actually getting into feature requests. So, just to give a bit of an example, in a typical cohort, what are some of the big technical outputs that we would get? Putting another lens on that, we have contributors throughout the year who are providing engineering hours to these projects. This partnership with RBC has yielded around 1,500 hours per year, and it's spread out throughout the whole year. So unlike internships or some of the other programs available, there's a huge burst of activity and a huge burst of support activity required. We think there's a lot of value in keeping this spread throughout the year. Really get to improve the business outcomes and provide a better kind of maintainer and mentor experience as well, rather than it being a huge surge at a particular time of the year. The insight around technical outputs is to meet your company's needs in an open source project, you need to actively invest in its development roadmap, right? Find those most important projects and actively invest in their development roadmap. Otherwise, there's a risk of projects starting to drift away from what you really care about as a business. So that ties the project really closely into, into your objectives, into your use case. Last layer of the onion, and perhaps the most important, talent cultivation. There is a really compelling talent angle to a program like the Open Source Fellowship. We identify, develop, vet, and create outcomes for the participants in the program. So it's probably very difficult to read up there. I'll just run through it quickly. A lot of people come into into the world of technology with a lot of energy, a lot of appetite, but don't really know how to focus it. They don't know what kind of projects to contribute to. They don't know what's out there. So we do a lot of work to help people do that. We invest very actively in development, through training, through project-based learning, and the whole program really actually creates very highly vetted and employable young developers, which is a huge outcome. On the other side of that, there is a learning perspective. We believe that open source is an incredible training ground. There are no onboarding barriers compared to coming and working for a company on closed source software. You get an enterprise grade code base. You get to collaborate and work with a team in a real world way. You get to build a public portfolio of all of the work that you've done. People can look at your code. They can click on a link in your resume and look at your code that's groundbreaking. There's a huge opportunity for mentoring and coaching, and there are certainly a lot of problems to solve. On the other side, we think about how our fellowship program amplifies some of that, and we apply some best practice tech education principles in here, like cohort-based learning, project-based learning. We run it all in a real engineering team construct, so people have a pod leader and a senior engineer, and they do stand-ups and retros. Through that, we build a mixture of hard skills and soft skills, a network, and most importantly, we pay an educational stipend because we don't believe anyone should be working for free in this day and age. Nurturing new contributors benefits your project, it benefits your business, and it benefits the whole open source ecosystem. I think we've talked about this a few times. And our insight really is, you can find great people as well as great code in the world of open source. And you can even grow your own. So looking back, summarizing all of that, find a model and mix of investments where the returns are aligned to your business needs. The best open source projects to invest in are more than lines of code. They're the ones that have a real community. And that's where we see the most outsized returns for those investments. To meet your company's needs, you have to actively invest in the development roadmap of the projects that are most important to you. And last but certainly not least is you can find great people as well as great code in open source, and you can even grow your own. And with that, we are going to see if we can introduce a real live fellow. Have we got Bosco on?
Yeah, Bosco's here.
Yes.
I guess you just need to pull him in.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Bosco. Take it away. Tell us your story.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Max, for the great presentation. Yes, yeah, I was a previous MLH fellow. And hi, everyone. My name is Bosco. Yeah, I'm very honored to be able to share my experience with the MLH Fellowship. I think it's a great program. It's pivotal in shaping my career in tech. Like many of you, I was eager to apply what I learned in school to real-world projects, and that's precisely what MLH Fellowship enabled me to do. I participated in 2 different tracks, the software engineering and the site reliability engineering track. In the software engineering track, I had the opportunity to contribute to the open source project JupyterLab Git extension. It's like the little Git panel in your Visual Studio Code where, except it's on JupyterLab where you can interact with like Git source control. Yeah, the work environment allowed me not just to code, but also to learn to work in a team and collaborate with other fellows. And in the site reliability engineering track, it was another eye-opening experience. I delved into full stack development, learned to build CI/CD pipelines, containerization, web hosting, and so much more. Yeah. So all of these inspired me. Like my interest in open source project, I think it's really great that with open source project, you can build something and everyone else can use. And the users themselves, they can actually contribute back to the project that they've used. And I think it's great that there's like a bi-directional relationship between the users and the contributors of open source projects. Yeah, and beyond all of these, what I valued the most was the mentorship and the sense of community that MLH Fellowship offered. During the program, there were plenty of chances to connect with industry leaders and experts who offered great career advice and like insights into their industry. I was also a small part of fellows because we run in a pod model where each fellow is assigned to like a small part of people who quickly became my like go-to network for support and learning. The sense of community created a truly collaborative and supportive learning environment that it's really hard to find elsewhere. This community, combined with the skills that I acquired, has made me a more confident and competent job candidate. And thanks to the connection I've made during the fellowship, yeah, so I actually get connected with Matt during the fellowship, and it has led me to a co-op position in Royal Bank of Canada. So for anyone who's looking to applying their skills, growing their network, and accelerating their career in tech, I think MLH Fellowship, it's a really great opportunity that you don't want to miss. And thank you for listening. I really hope that you'll be part of the MLH community soon.
Thanks so much, Bosco. And I think he's been very modest there in the way that he's told his story, because Matt and the team were so impressed with the code that he was contributing to the open source project that he landed himself a co-op position and spent most of, I think, the last year at RBC, continuing to work on those internal platforms. So Bosco's not an outlier, and certainly not the only person that we've seen go on to work at the sponsoring company. The other side of what we've seen post fellowship program is that people actually go on to become long-term open source contributors and advocates. Here's a couple of examples of people's GitHub charts, just showing that once they leave the program, their work in open source by no means slows down. It is just the beginning of that story. I am conscious of time. I want to say thank you and grab some time for Q&A here. So any questions from the audience? I'm going to come over here. Hello.
Hi. So when you work with a company like RBC, I'm sure they have a lot of rules and things they can share and they cannot share. And then open source, everything is you share everything, right? Like, so how do you kind of differentiate, or how do you bring that piece that can be shared in terms of code? And the second question I have is some of the tools that you use in a company which has been there for a long time and doing its thing, the tools that you use, it could even be the source control could differ from what we use in open source.
Yeah, great. It's a great pair of questions. I think I'm going to touch on one bit of it, which is one of the big. Yeah, I will. The question, Matt, was really essentially in open source, people are going to be using different tools to your developers in RBC, and there's going to be proprietary information that your team can't share with people who are working externally on an open source project. One of the things that I'd say from the MLH standpoint, something that we've seen time and again, especially with a lot of highly regulated companies we've worked with, is collaborating with developers through open source removes a lot of those barriers, right? You don't necessarily need to onboard people to any of your systems for them to contribute to open source projects that you use. But yeah, really, I think I'd love to hand that question over to Matt to share a bit about what is shared, what isn't shared, any hurdles that you've met and overcome.
Yeah, it's funny, like RBC is a big organization, like 90,000 plus people, with a whole army of lawyers and other things around stuff too. So there's a lot of barriers for us to really share anything outside of our network and four walls back to these open source projects and things like that. Even though as a developer, we're highly reliant on all these different open source projects to begin with. We typically use all the same tools. We just have safe ways to access a lot of this stuff internally, and a lot of things like proxies and firewalls in place, and monitoring at all levels to see if code escapes out into the wild, stuff like that kind of like happens, right? So it's a very highly regulated industry, which just creates a lot of barriers to, I guess, risk appetite would be the best way to put it, right? So it's not that I don't think people in RBC want to contribute back to that community. It's more of like a legality perspective, like what kind of operational risk they want to expose themselves to, contributing to a piece of code that might or might not, cause a problem somewhere else, and are they going to get sued over it, or whatever else. There's a whole myriad of arguments that kind of prevents us from doing that. That being said, there's a lot of things that kind of fall into that intellectual property umbrella, either it be IP around banking tools and services, or investment strategies or things like that. There's a lot of rules and things like that in place. Even myself, like in Bosco, if you're working in investment finance, to prevent things like insider trading, we're not allowed to hold like individual securities and things like that. We can invest personally in things like ETFs or mutual funds, but like going and holding a bunch of like Google shares or something like that, that's not something we can do. So there's a lot of rules and things like that exists in our space that kind of limit things for us. So trying to give some of that good karma back into the world of things that we're really reliant on to be able to deliver stuff to our partners in these investment teams is really challenging. So it's nice being able to have that sort of outlet with MLH, and also access to a talent pipeline as well, right? So we're always looking for people. So like Bosco here, who's been enjoying some time with my team here. which has been exciting for us. I don't know if that answers your question. I didn't quite get all of it when you were, I guess, explaining that to Max there.
Do we have any other questions? Sure. The question was, you know, what's the audience from a participation perspective for the program, and what kinds of outcomes could they expect? The fellowship program is people who are 18 plus. There's no requirement to have formal university education or to be a computer science major. We found a lot of people who are self-taught or bootcamp backgrounds, or you know, majoring in like art history or something, just as good developers as we find in CS majors. In terms of the student experience, I think of it very much like interning on an open source project. So you will get paid, you will have a manager, you will have a set of deliverables to work on, you'll have some training at the beginning. Some of the things that are a little bit different is that you get a portfolio of work that is public. If you go and do an internship at you know, Goldman Sachs, you're not allowed to tell anyone what programming language you use, let alone what platform you're contributing to. In this kind of program, all of the code that you've written is public. So, you know, future employers can go and look at the code that you've done. Your code is potentially being downloaded and used by millions of people. That's one of the biggest differences. You
look at Bosco here as a part of my team. You know, I made it a very easy choice for her to kind of bring him on as a student, be able to actually, you know, follow along with the work he was doing over his fellowship, right? You know, seeing what his, you know, code commit looks like, and like from commenting, how good he is at commenting things and doing, you know, unit tests or whatever else, right? Rarely do you have that as an opportunity during like an interview process to really kind of get real insight into how people actually work. So it's worked out quite nicely for us from like a CV building perspective, I guess.
Yeah, some of our sponsors think of it as the most extensive interview process they can ever have with anyone. At the same time as you know, whether they take those people on or not, really nurturing them and getting some open source code value from them as well. I'm conscious of time here, and I can see a few people are starting to get up because there's other talks to go to. So I just want to wrap by saying thank you. I'm going to stick around for 10-15 minutes if anyone wants to chat. MLH has also got a booth on the first floor. And one of my colleagues, Fiona, is giving a talk this afternoon about the wider early career developer community and their relationship with open source. So yeah, thank you all very much for attending. Really appreciate you having us here. Thank you, Matt and Bosco, for dialing in. I think it's really helpful.